It's Lisa from Been There, Got Out. I am super excited for today's guest. It's Jon from Male Victims of Female Narcissists, and he did not show his face for a long time, so I'm really glad. There he is. I'm really glad that he agreed to do this because see your face, Jon. So just a few minutes ago is the first time I ever saw his face. And as soon as he gets on, I will let him introduce himself. There he is.
There I am. Like I told you, I have a face for radio, so that's why I didn't do it for such a long time.
Oh,
actually,
come on.
I was kind of more concerned about my kids in this whole thing, and I don't think they know still that I'm doing this, but I'm to the point where if they found out, they found out. So,
yeah. So Jon, introduce yourself. Say what you just said, like a little bit about your background and how this all started.
Jon McKinney. I didn't say this earlier. I actually have a background in church work from over the years. So there may be some other things we talked about, like we connected on about religiosity and narcissism, kind of connecting there. We may get to that, but I was married to a covert narcissist for 27 years. 25 of them totally in the dark. So I didn't know narcissism exists. I didn't know what it was. I had absolutely no clue about it. Although with my background, I'd figured out the dynamics in the relationship and what was going on and addressed those things, but I didn't have a name for it. I didn't know where to get help for it. And one day somebody posted something on Facebook and changed my life. And I was like, oh my gosh, here we are. So I learned the hard way, like most narcissists do. So that's how I got involved. I also discovered when I was trying to learn about it that most of the material was written by women about men, and I had a really hard time identifying with it. So I started my account to see if there were some others out there, and lo and behold, there are many abused by female narcissists particularly, and tons of men out there as well, particularly as well. So it's been a great journey, and thank you for having me here, Lisa.
Oh, my pleasure, and I'm glad that you noted that a number of followers to your account, including me, are women, because women are also victims of female narcissists. There's a lot of content out there about narcissistic mothers, so it's not just men that are abusers, but every time that we put anything out there, even though we are half male, half female, my partner Chris is a man, we get a little attacked sometimes by women in particular, which is unfortunate because we know that, and we keep saying it, abuse is a human issue. Absolutely. It's not a gender issue. So I'm so glad.
People would see my account and they go, well, male victims of female narcissists, all you care about is men. That is absolutely not true. In fact, if you go through my posts, you would find that the overwhelming majority of them, like 98% of them, are not gender specific, because women are just as abused by female narcissists, and I think that's why they follow. In fact, my followership, you'd also think with an account named Male Victims of Female Narcissists would be exponentially heavier in men, and guess what? It's not. It's like 51% men, 50% women. Yeah. And so many of the women, I have to tell you, have been so unbelievably supportive. Mary's in here again, from Lose Your Narc, and Madupe's in too.
Oh, Madupe, that's how we met too.
Madupe, he's amazing also. But I didn't interview him some time ago. But the women have been overwhelmingly just so supportive. And Dave's there. I hope things are great for you, brother. Thanks for coming today. So, it is a human issue, and not just men. So while we may be talking specifically about men today, I know that Lisa and my heart is to help anybody who's going through this, regardless of their gender in any kind of way. Nobody should be abused like this.
Right, exactly. So we just had a call with a male client the other day, and he was talking about he's actually still in the relationship, but he was saying that, like you, when he's looking for resources, there's so much that just says that men are abusers, never victims. He's like, I just feel so alone, and I feel like I'd look so stupid if I reached out to somebody, because I feel like they'd look at me like I was a wimp or something. Yeah. Can you talk about, let's get into how men experience abuse differently.
What you mentioned there is very, very much a part of the equation. In my experience, and this is from talking with thousands like you have over the years, because there isn't enough. I think it is a very hard thing to research when people who are narcissists don't really get help. So they're not sitting in therapist's office, and what you're left with is Instagram and trying to understand it here. And personally, I think Instagram for me has been the best way to heal and to get into the community here. So, but men experience narcissism a little bit differently. There's this masculinity thing where you know, we don't like to admit failure, we don't like to admit weakness, and sometimes, particularly to women, you know, we take punches sometimes we shouldn't take, and we don't complain about these things. So when you get to a place where abuse is actually taking place, to communicate that, to say it is very hard. And there's a lady I interacted with early on, maybe about 6 months in, who's doing a research paper, and for the life of me, I can't remember her name, so I apologize if you're watching. But she was talking about even the terms like abuse and victim. Men don't even, we just don't connect with those phrases.
Right.
Like they don't mean anything to us because I don't want to be the abused. I don't want to be a victim of all things. And she was talking about at some point in time setting up a phone line for men, particularly who would have some place to call or some place to go, and we were communicating back and forth about how do you get a man to admit that he's a victim when he doesn't want to admit he's a victim. And the phraseology we came up with was unbelievable cruelty. That there. And, you know, you're in a situation where somebody is being overwhelmingly cruel to you, either emotionally or in some cases physically, financially. You know, narcissists are kind of in all of those places. So you have that with men. They don't want to look like the wimp. They don't want to look weak, because by and large, a lot of us are still providers and doing all of this. And I do think it's hardwired into our DNA. So you've got that on one side of the equation. And I think on the other side of the equation, and again, this is not a rule, but I would tell you that from my interactions with men, the overwhelming majority of the women fly under the radar with their narcissism. So they're more covert in the way they do this, and they kind of fly beneath, and publicly they're oftentimes not known. And if you couple that it's not visible to anybody else, just the guy, and you take the fact that he doesn't want to be a victim, and if he communicates that he's a victim, a lot of times even people don't listen. It's not just a man's expectation that he's, you know, victimized or not, but the world doesn't care in a lot of ways if you even speak up. So I mean, I had a therapist I sat with, and I was explaining all this stuff to her. Now she turned out to be a narcissist, so there's that. She gaslighted me from session number 1. So she and my ex kind of bonded. But
yeah, that happens a lot.
She goes, "I just want you to know I have absolutely no compassion for you whatsoever." I'm like, she's a pathological liar, lying to you right now, and you don't care. And I do think, you know, with Johnny Depp was a great thing, although very triggering for many of us who are men out there watching the situation with him and Amber go down, and her words are just narc, 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 where you kind of see something like that in the spotlight, and it illustrates and at least makes us aware that these kinds of things are happening to men and just women, and not just women. So if you take all of those things together, it's kind of the perfect storm, and it sets men alone in this, which is very, very difficult. Yeah. So I have a lot of people reaching out to me and going, "Man, thank you so much for doing what you do." You know, I think if I can help somebody understand earlier than I did, which again, 25 years of pain, if that's worth something to help somebody else understand before they're married or year 1 or year 2, I've saved them a world of hurt. So that's really what I try to do, and expose what narcissists do through my own personal experiences with them, and also through some of the experiences of the men I interact with.
Yeah, well, something you just said before was how a lot of them fly under the radar. We hear the same thing from our female clients who are talking about their ex-spouses who happen to be men. It's like, so can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like? How do these people fly under the radar?
To the outside world, oftentimes they're very industrious and they look very charming. They'll step in where people have need, and then when you are home privately with them, it's like there's the illustration I use, the visual illustration I think of. There's a television show when I was a kid on called The Flintstones. You may or may not remember it.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And there was a character in The Flintstones called Schleprock. And he was this guy, he'd always go wowsy, wowsy, woo, and things were always bad for him. And he had this storm cloud that followed just him wherever he went. And dealing with a covert narcissist is kind of like that. It's like having your own personal enemy who pretends that they love you. The rest of the world has absolutely no idea what's going on. You could be having a horrible physical relationship. There can be domestic violence. You can be lied to pathologically, and unfortunately nobody else sees it. My kids don't see this. Now, she was not in such a healthy relationship with them, I don't believe either, and they're not, they didn't experience what I experienced behind the scenes. It's kind of a different thing for them than it was me, and I hope they figure it out one day. But it's like your own private war when you're dealing with a covert narcissist. And when you tell people, again, if you're a guy, people aren't paying attention to you much anyways. And again, you don't want to connect with the idea of abuse, and you don't want to connect with the idea of being victimized. But if you tell somebody, in addition to all of that, you've got somebody going, wait, what? That happens in your, no. Because the person they know and the person you know are two completely different people. And it's very hard to get people on board who might be your friends or might not be your friends when this is all done, to actually believe that something is taking place in the home that is so awful that it can be horribly traumatic to a guy and so super destructive. And for me, it brought me to a place of really wanting to take my own life for a long, long period of time.
We hear that a lot from the male clients that we talk to. That's very, very common, suicidal men.
I didn't believe in divorce and really kind of don't in some respects still, even though I'm divorced now. But I used to pray, till death do us part. And I used to go, Lord, I'm ready. I'm ready to go. This is so horrible, and it was just something I finally had to get out of it to protect my own sanity, to protect my own emotional well-being, to guard my kids in a sense. I mean, I was really dealing with a choice between me staying in something I couldn't live in and me not living. And it came down to that. You can either have a divorced dad or you can have a dead dad. Which do you choose? And in my mental frame at the time, it really had kind of come to that. And truthfully, Lisa, it's taken me a while to even, like, I don't know that I said it quite that succinctly in any of the other interviews I've done. It's taken me a while to kind of own that I was really, really in that place, and probably also for masculinity issues too. I didn't want to admit that, but these are realities. I've had parents tell me their sons are dead from this. This happens.
Yeah, we know.
You do. Men who are physically abused by women, financially abused by women, millions and millions in debt on some of these things, and still, even in the wake of divorce or separation, trying to navigate through how to go deal with them. And if their family is involved, it's more complicated because you can't go no contact completely in many situations. And it really is complicated and difficult for men or anybody that is going through this. Women have their own sets of struggles too. A lot of times they're not the breadwinners in the family, and they got to figure out how to go do this again and get out of the house and provide for themselves financially. It's hard for them as well. It's just a very difficult scenario for anybody who might be involved.
Yeah, I know. I had put a post up this morning that Judge Anthony had talked about um, the biases on both sides and how, we have these extreme groups, the mother's rights and the father's rights, and when everybody kind of wants the same thing as a protective parent, like they want family court reform, they want things to be fair, but they spend so much time just bashing each other. It's not helpful to anyone, and it's making it worse for all victims because of what happens from this. I was going to say that somebody had also asked Judge Anthony just in his feed, because he's an attorney, a family law attorney, and also a retired judge. In his experience, who's abused more? And he said physical abuse, it's definitely women who are abused more, but the emotional stuff, half and half. And a number of attorneys that we've spoken to have said the same thing, that in court, and we've seen it too, legal abuse, half and half, false allegations on both sides. Yeah. It's both ways. The verbal abuse, it's 50-50 at least, so it's not just that men are the abusers, but because of the physical, people tend to associate that. Yeah. One of the things that we hear a lot with the legal stuff is that when it's a divorce pending, each side tends to weaponize something, and I want to hear what you think about this, that male narcissist will say, I'm going to leave you with nothing, you're going to be homeless and in the street, and female narcissists will say, I'm going to take the kids away from you, or I'm going to make claims that you've abused the kids to keep them away from you. What do you think of that? Or what have you seen?
So in my situation, I was actually trying to figure out a budget for her so that she could live. So I can't connect with that thought necessarily, but I'm sure that happens because men are so agitated from the emotional abuse. I think it's probably also doesn't help for the physical abuse, that men sometimes get to the place where they've been so emotionally abused so badly they don't know what else to do other than to lash out physically. And that's not an excuse. That's not an excuse to go do it. But I think it is a precipitating thing as well. And it really, you want to talk about a war. It's when you're trying to figure out how to go survive on the other side of this thing. It's very hard to go navigate that and to go win it on the other side. You're giving these statistics, 50-50 on the emotional abuse. That may be the best statistic we have on narcissism, to be honest with you, because, excuse me, narcissists, again, they don't go to the therapist's office, but they do wind up in divorce court pretty regularly. So that may be the best statistic we have on men versus women in narcissism, and the fact that you guys are all doing this, and these attorneys are saying the same kind of thing. I know you and I had a conversation, and Badita talked about this, relatively the same thing last week over at Jafari Legal, where she was talking about it being 50-50 too. So it would be easy to be spiteful in this and to weaponize whatever you can to get your way. Mm-hmm. For me, my kids had been weaponized, and I didn't realize it was my issue. When I told her I had wanted a divorce, what she said to me was, I know that some of the children will never speak to you again. And in that moment, the light went off, and I go, my God, she's already had these conversations with them. And I didn't. As far as I was concerned, and her issues with narcissism and issues with our marriage, I was very careful not to have any of those conversations with my children. I still don't have conversations about that with my children necessarily, unless they ask. If they ask, I'm happy to go answer, but I've kind of talked about at a very macro level why I left without giving specifics. I speak only favorably of their mother and in a historical context. And for her, what I discovered was that the parental alienation and the disrespect and the communicating of distrust actually doesn't happen with the divorce. It happens far earlier than that. And what I realized in that moment, the light went off, and she said that, and I go, oh my God, she's been having these conversations with my kids all along and treating them more like a brother or sister and confiding in them, of course, with her spin.
And it's called grooming.
Really,
she's groomed the kids for this years beforehand. We've talked about this before.
And so that when I said I wanted a divorce, and they push you that far that you can go do that. And again, it literally took me 25 years to get to the place where I could even consider it, because religiously, spiritually, I don't believe in divorce. It took me that long to assent to the fact that I could even consider it. And in that moment, it was all different. And it was like flipping a switch for her, and it shut the door on relationship with me, with all 4 of my children. 3 are still estranged, and 1 is communicating with me now, who wasn't earlier on when it first happened. And I hope and pray for the others that they kind of understand what's taking place here. But it's so very subtle. Some of the, particularly with the covert narcissists, it's very subtle. It's subtle disrespect. It's subtle. You can't trust him. And I think, one of the things a narcissist, whether covert or malignant, they don't trust anybody, and that's because they're untrustworthy people.
That's why they accuse you of cheating and doing all these things when they're the ones doing that. That's how you find out.
Yeah, God knows what she's accused me of, and so when the time comes and you finally react and you say, okay, I can't go any farther. You realize in that moment that the parental alienation engine has been in place for, in my situation, I really do think it's decades. And for her, this is the same scenario that she grew up in. It was a passive-aggressive mother who would constantly disrespect her husband, and how she would manage the relationships with the kids and triangulate. She alienated the kids from him, and made all the communication go through her instead of directly to him. And ultimately, it winds up being alienation on the other side of that. So the divorce or the separation is like, it flips a switch for something that has been prepared for decades, and you go, my God, what did I get into? And I trusted her. I shouldn't have, but I thought the best of her, and I thought that she would not do these kinds of things and keep the kinds of things that were going on between us, and that absolutely didn't take place. And I would tell you, if you're dealing with a narcissist, doesn't take place. And there's no conversation you can have to go fix it. You have to wait till your kids kind of come around and understand, and that's what I hope and pray for. But it happens, and it's all weaponizing. And narcissists are very, very quick to do it. And I'll tell you, if you're in a relationship with a narcissist and you have children, they're already trying to alienate you. They've been doing this already. Know that it's happening. Take a look at these kinds of things with a fine-tooth comb. Look hard at them, even if you're planning on getting out, and know that that's already taking place. In the wake of the separation and the divorce and the few conversations I did have with my children, each one of them I spoke with had privileged information that nobody else on the planet would have known except for me, my ex. Mm-hmm. There's no way they could have, and I know I didn't communicate it to anybody, but there were things that were spoken that were like right out of my mouth, or twisted right out of my mouth in some respects, spoken incorrectly, and yet attributed to me. That there's no possible way they could have known about that unless the narcissist, my narcissist ex had told them. So that kind of stuff is going on, and they know how to hurt you, and certainly with your children, it's a really easy way to go do it.
Yeah, as you're saying that, it reminds me of years ago when I was just separating from my ex, and I had a wonderful divorce attorney, and he said, you need to go to Al-Anon. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, I thought my ex was an alcoholic, but he said, no, you need to learn emotional detachment. And I had no idea what that was. I was, with my ex for 20 years. So I went to a meeting, and I was crying my way through the first couple. But one thing that I was really worried about was how to tell the kids that we were getting a divorce. And you're not allowed to have what's called crosstalk, so you can't have private conversations. But in the break, a couple of people came up to me and said, you know, one thing you need to do is make sure to tell your kids that you are getting a divorce and to tell them the truth about why. And I made sure my ex was there for part of it. They said, if you don't make the truth clear to them as to why you're getting a divorce, he is going to get into their heads and make it as though you are breaking up the family, and that he's going to try to come back, and you're just not allowing him to come back. So you have to get ahead of that. And I had no idea. I didn't know what narcissism was. I didn't know that the people in the group also had experience with that as well, but it was so helpful. Yeah. And they also said, if you don't tell your kids the truth from the beginning, when they discover what actually happened, because they will, it might take decades, but they will be re-traumatized, because they will have to rewrite history because they've been lied to this whole time. So that other person's going to be lying to them. You don't want to lie to them also. And it was such significant information for me.
And my narcissist, it by the way, it's not confined to just your family or your kids. They can alienate you from just about anybody, and will try to do so. So I've lost my parents in this, and I've lost my sisters in this as well. And again, in each one of those situations, every one of those situations, I attributed more maturity to her than she deserved. And she was behind the scenes, disrespecting me, backbiting me, speaking deception to other people, and I think for years, so that when I closed the door, I was completely alienated from my entire family.
I'm really glad, I'm not glad that happened. I'm really glad you brought that up, because a number of our clients are feeling, have experienced the same thing, and they feel so alone and like absolute losers, because their abuser has aligned with their family of origin, and they feel like they have nobody, and that they're the only people who are dealing with this. So it is actually really common, because they're so manipulative, for them to get to your own family and communities.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm telling you, they can do an absolute job on anybody. My parents told me they didn't want to hear from me, and they did not want to hear anything about what was going on with respect to the divorce. Zero. They did not want to hear from me about any of it. And now when they have family gatherings and things like that, they invite her and don't invite me. Yeah. They've not only abandoned me, but they've replaced me in the family with her. When they travel to come see my kids, they stay with her and don't tell me they're coming so much in advance. So it really can be bizarre on the other side of that, how kids and friends and family just completely have been following this other story that they've been told for a really long time, and it makes you the person who's the bad guy. And then when you get to that place and you pull the trigger on the divorce or the separation, it's like all this collection of stuff they've been working on thrown at you in an instant, and you find yourself really by yourself in a lot of respects in dealing with all of this. You can lose, the people you thought were your closest allies, and the people in your family that mean the most to you. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, we often talk about how these people like narcissists are affected when there's a breakup, even if they're the ones who caused it. Like, they did all of these things, but you decide, I'm done, that suddenly you've destroyed, it's your fault, you've destroyed the family, the perfect home, the perfect life. And so therefore, instead of confronting their own feelings of being abandoned and being a failure as a spouse, they get that narcissistic rage, and they're like, you know what? He's the villain and I'm the victim, and I have to prove to everyone, instead of thinking that maybe I was part of it, I have to prove to everyone that it's all his fault, and I will do anything to destroy him.
In fact, I did it one time. It said, she says he divorced me, and I say I divorced her. She, again, going out trying to accuse me and blame me and making me out to be the bad guy in the whole thing. And I just flat out tell people I did it. I left the situation, and I want to be completely honest and transparent about that. And if anybody asks, I'm out to tell them. And it's interesting. We talked some about religion. They can use that against you too. They've done the same thing with my church. So if you have people who are religious, in a sense, they can really turn that group of people against you as well. You said it, they go, well, you're the divorcer, so it's all your fault. And religion, I think, is very good at not looking deeply at that. It's interesting. The church where I went, they started to send me basically a series of emails after emails. True, but if you're a pastor out here and somebody's going through this stuff, pick up the damn phone. Do not send somebody an email. It's ridiculous. But they started to send me emails and ask me to come in so that they could read the scriptures to me and tell me I was in sin and that I go back to my ex. And my response was basically, look, if you withhold judgment and want to have a conversation about what's actually taking place, I'd be happy to go do that. And their answer was no. So I didn't have a conversation. And again, it's very simplistic thinking. He divorced. He's in sin. He's the problem. Done. And now they tell people I'm dead and that she's a widow.
Oh my God. Actually, you're making me think of something from a friend of ours, a Canadian therapist, author, etc., named Marnie Grundman, and she was talking about how an answer sometimes when people are trying to say, well, you're the one in the wrong, is how many. I'm sure I'm going to get it wrong, but how many times do I have to keep allowing myself to be hurt and abused by this person and treated so terribly to make you happy?
Yeah.
Like, who is this person? It's your life. Like, how many times do I need to keep going back to something that's so unhealthy and awful for me to make you happy?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's where I think one of the most difficult things in this, we see it a lot, I know you do, is trauma bonding and a lack of self-care. Or I'd even call it, for guys, that the word for me is self-respect, that I need to have enough respect for myself not to go put myself back in a situation like that. And you may have to go back for a time, but plan an exit. It's you can start planning it, whether you're man or woman. You can start planning your exit today, and you may not be able to execute it today, but you may be able to execute it tomorrow, or you may be able to execute it 3 months from now or 6 months from now. Mine was about a 2-year process, where I started preparing in some respects to kind of do this. I secured a place to go. You gotta have a place to live, and figured a way kind of out of this. And it took a while to go do. And from the time I was separated to the time I was actually divorced was about 9 months, and lots of going back and forth and trying not to financially crucify myself at the same time, or her, so that we could both have a life and able to live and within our means and those kinds of things. And it really does take time, but there is some preparation. If you're in a situation like that now, I would tell you, take small steps. It might be, I went and got a post office box. So $60 a year, something I could go afford and go spend a little money on, and I started to have a post office box, and then I opened up a bank account that was just mine. So it takes time to get all these details done, but you can certainly do them, and as you plan, kind of execute this strategy and be ready for it.
Yeah, so I'm also a state certified domestic violence advocate, and there's all these free resources I had no idea while I was still in the relationship, because I didn't realize that what abuse actually meant. But one thing that DV centers do for free is exit planning, safety planning, which is what you say, and they have checklists, and you can just call and they can go through the things that you need to start putting together before you leave. And it's very important. I see Padita has mentioned talk to a divorce attorney, but to have that pre-divorce strategy, which she also mentioned, like, you need to get your ducks in a row, because once you enter the legal system, it turns into this terrible battle. Right.
Just a bloodfest. Everybody scraping for every dollar they can scrape for. Everybody fighting over the kids and what they're going to go do. It's really is bloodthirsty. And I want to say this to people. There was something I had to keep telling myself on the way out of this, because there were days when you're in the middle of all this. I mean, it's bad enough you've kind of been connected with a narcissist and in some respects are dealing with the trauma trauma of that. But there are days that really are hard and bleak, and you feel it in the weight of your soul. And I had to keep repeating this one statement to me, and I still say it to myself a lot, but it's, you're going to be okay. And that's what I want to tell you. I don't know how long it's going to take, but it is, you're going to be okay. There is another side to this. It may not be what you've dreamed of. You know, I didn't ever dreamed of being the divorced guy and having to go restart my life in my 50s and trying to figure all that out again. I didn't, when I put a ring on my finger when I was in my 20s, I wasn't planning for that. I didn't expect that. It was not my dream to be in this place, to have to start over again when others are, you know, enjoying the fruit of intimacy for so many years. It was just not possible, no matter how hard I worked it. So you may get a plan B, and it may not be the plan A you had in your head, but it's going to be okay. Yeah. So no, keep telling yourself that it is going to be okay. There will be a place, you're reasonably free of them. There will be a place where all this kind of gets figured out and revealed. And you know, my prayers and Lisa's are with you as you endure these kinds of things. Very, very difficult.
Right. And I'm glad you noted that. We often talk about it's just an emotional roller coaster. And, you know, we specialize in legal abuse and dealing with going through the court system, the family court system with narcissists and other difficult personalities. But we say, like, it never stays this way, and we can speak to you from the other side. But for me too, I'm still in the legal system 9 years later. I'm still dealing with it, but things are so much better. But I remember those days, and I just talked about it yesterday, where it felt like I'd wake up every morning with a physical ball of pain.
100%.
It was like, for 1 second you wake up and you're like, oh God, like I would give anything not to just feel this bad. And I'm not a crier, but I was crying every single day for a long time, thinking it's never going to get better. Like, this is horrible. Completely changed, but it takes time, and it takes getting the right support. And part of that is talking to people like you, Jon. We're getting validated, feeling like you're not the only one, because it always feels like you're the only one dealing with the most crazy situation. And keep in mind that you can't compare your divorce to other divorces, because most of them are not with narcissists and abusive people. 90-ish% don't deal with this. And so that's why it's important to be around people who do know this personality type and how they behave in and out of the legal system. I wanted to ask you about the alienation stuff, and I know it's a controversial term, so we say parental alienation and also abuse by proxy. But you know that your ex was already grooming those kids while you were still married. My ex did the same exact thing. I look back on the things he would say about me. Oh, mom's just this, mom's just that, mom's just cranky, mom's just, you know, and it's like, wow. I had so deeper than I ever that hole is so much deeper than I ever expected. Right. Unbelievable. So if you could speak to somebody who is teetering on, because we just talked to one of our clients yesterday who's still in the relationship and terrified, a man, I mean, we have female clients obviously too, but just the one I'm thinking of yesterday, who has a young child and is thinking, I'm worried that this kid is going to be turned against me. Like, what do you think there's anything people can do to combat the other parent slowly turning the kids against the protective parent while they're still in the relationship? Really do. And quite honestly, I think that leaving is probably the better solution for the child. And it may not feel that way, because you think, okay, well, they're going to be with mom, and then they're going to be with me, and it's back and forth. But what takes place in the divorce also is it gives you the opportunity to parent your kid individually, so that your kid has a really good example of what healthy parenting is. And he or she may continue to paint you in the negative, but you be the good parent you are. And I really do believe that kids figure this stuff out in the long run. And the fact that in his situation, the child is young, that child will have decades of healthy relationship with one parent. When you're together in the relationship, I got to tell you this, it's always bad parenting.
because you have somebody right there all the time. Every time you're going and doing something healthy, they're redefining it to the kids behind you constantly. You're being disrespected. You're being alienated behind the scenes. Very, very hard to parent kids well, I think, when you're in the relationship together. And when you're separate, you have opportunities with your children to go parent them well. And I really do believe kids respond to that, and we'll see that over time. In my kids, I had to concede at some point in time. I had to go, okay, we were bad parents, not because my parenting wasn't healthy, but my kids' experience of it is bad parenting regardless. Because the dynamic is completely and totally unhealthy, and it's very hard on them, and they experienced that. I wanted to stay until they until they graduated from high school and did.
Everybody feels like I want to stay for the sake of the kids. Let's wait till they go off to college.
I'm not convinced that's better.
No.
I really am not. It's easier financially, I think, but it's not necessarily better for the kids. I think if you got a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old right now, when somebody badmouths somebody else, people figure that out. You're only really illustrating your own character when you do those kinds of things, and people figure that out. And you have the opportunity to go and parent your kids healthy and good and lovingly. And I really do think in the long run that wins, and kids are smart enough to figure that out in time, and I'm hoping mine are as well, at some point in time.
Yeah, I'm so glad. I'm like, you probably see me taking notes. I love writing down quotes because I'm going to use that. That is such an important one about it's bad parenting when you're together. And I think back in my situation, my ex would always undermine me. Like, even when our son was our oldest, really little, and I put him in a timeout, or I try to teach him, like, you're not allowed to behave like that. My ex would say, oh, that's okay, let him out. He can take it back. He can take it back. So he was teaching him that he didn't have to deal with the consequences of his actions. And it made it harder for him.
Complete and total disrespect of you and your parenting skill in your presence right there. Right.
And also teaching our son that he doesn't have to deal with the consequences of his actions, which is how a narcissist behaves. Like, I could do whatever I want and nothing's going to happen to me. And as our son got older, and luckily we did separate, but he was a teenager, I felt like it was harder in some ways to parent him because he had been trained to think I could do whatever and I could just take it back. Like, I could just say I'm sorry and then everybody forgets about it, but that's not how life works.
It's like
sometimes you can't take it back.
It really is like deprogramming somebody.
Right?
You've got this means that you kind of go act over a long period of time, and your kids are used to that. And then when you bring the legitimate article, the real health into the relationship, they kind of don't know what to do with it, and they're stuck in these old ways. And it's like there's a time period there, I am sure, where it's such a struggle to kind of, again, I don't know, the word is really deprogram them from this unhealthy environment. I think my kids figured out the environment was unhealthy. I think they do know that. I don't think they know why. And again, those are the kinds of things that are between them and God, and they'll have to kind of determine over time, and see if they really want to understand the truth. And some, I think it's a process for anybody. Some kids will figure it out, some kids won't figure it out, and it's hard to know. There's no straight line to healing, and there's no straight line to being unalienated, I think, as a parent either.
Right. And think about it, for you as a grown-up, it took you 25, 27 years. So for a child who has a different relationship, who thinks both my parents love me unconditionally, for them to start unraveling, like, maybe this person doesn't really love me, that's hard.
Yeah.
And that does take a long time. So people are like, our clients often get upset, like, why doesn't my kid see it? It's like, okay, pause. Like, you as a grown-up didn't see it for so long. These people are master manipulators. Chris, my partner, always likes to say they've been doing it since they were adolescents. They're really, really good. They got you. And it's a different relationship with the kids, and the kids are part of them as well. It's not easy.
Mm-hmm. And I think the message oftentimes that kind of seals the deal on the parent, we were talking about how you kind of have this wave of stuff that's been building for years, and you execute the separation or the divorce, and it's like the fruit of that becomes parental alienation. The message, I think, is normally Look what he or she did to us. It's not what he or she did to me. There's a lack of separation between the children and the narcissist parent. It's
interesting.
He us. He left the family. He's not supporting us, and that's the message. That is the message of the narc to the kids more often than not. That is weaponizing language instead of taking ownership and going, you know what, things didn't work out between us personally, but your father still loves you and I still love you, and that would be healthy divorces. And some people do that, and for those of you guys who've done that, good for you. That's awesome to make sure that your children are not alienated from the person that helped bring them into this world is a fantastic thing. But with a narcissist, you don't get that. There's not this separation between the children and the narcissistic parent. Me personally, it felt like I had 5 kids instead of 4. It's kind of always me and them. And
totally.
I felt left out, and I was left out. The conversation again triangulated around me. I was always the last to know things in the relationship. I was disrespected passively behind the scenes. She and I could even come up with a solution for something for the kids together, and she would execute something we didn't talk about and agree to. And I'm sure, again, here's what your father wanted to do. Well, here's what I'm going to go do. And there's just this very passive aggressive disrespect, all culminated in he's leaving us, and that sets them off in their own little team. It sets them off in their own little world, and is the kiss of death for you as the parent with respect to alienation, because there's no real separation between the children and them. My therapist said it this way. She said you have to think of her as not an adult in some respects. She's very childlike. We talk about that on my page some, that I think I'm dealing emotionally with a 3 to 5-year-old. And it's like they feel unsafe, so they gather around their little team of children around them, and they're this little team of kids together. And it's almost like dealing with an older child with younger children who may be protective of the younger children, rather than dealing with an adult who's a parent or a wife or a husband in that respect. And that mentality is the basis of an awful lot of parental alienation.
Yeah, and when you're saying that, I'm thinking about how so many of them try to act like they're friends with the kids. When they go to their house, they don't discipline them. They buy them lots of stuff. Everything's about fun. And then you, as the healthy parent, are trying to raise your kids and parent your kids to make them good, independent people who can function in society. And again, you're being undermined all the time. And that's a huge problem, very difficult.
Ultimately, you wind up being painted as the crazy parent with good parent when you're delivering.
You're mean.
Absolutely. It's kind of the equivalent of having a kid who's super overweight, and you got mom who's the narcissist and dad who is the healthy parent, and mom's going, here's a candy bar, and in your head you're going, here's broccoli. What you really need is a couple laps around the block right now, and you need some vegetables in you, and to go begin to have a healthier lifestyle, and the kid will immediately take the candy bar.
Of course,
every time, right?
Because it's easy, and it's also the path of least resistance too.
Always, and that's kind of how my ex, and again, she was a covert narcissist. She did it that way. She manipulated the kids with the good stuff, and when I brought discipline or correct parenting to the table, that didn't fly. It was always the path of least resistance, and they win the children that way. And you were painted broccoli. What parent would give their kids broccoli? Well, a parent who's got a kid who's the size of a house. Absolutely. Because I care about my kids, it's my job to go do what's best for them, when a narcissist is always doing not what's best for the children, but what's best for themselves and the relationship. And oftentimes that's how they manipulate them. Me personally, I think that also times the covert narcissists, particularly when you're dealing with children, the kids are their supply.
Oh,
they don't run
Definitely. Yeah.
And,
Let's talk about that a little bit because we only have a few more
yeah.
minutes. But this is such a juicy conversation. I know, John, we're probably going to have you back on if you agree to, because there's so much to say.
Yeah. So my ex didn't run to another lover, and quite honestly, she doesn't have to. There's no other room in her life for anybody but herself. But what winds up happening is they're already entrenched in this unhealthy kind of manipulative relationship with the kids, and they're confiding in the kids again, like it's, they're the 10-year-old and the others are the 5-year-olds, and they're very protective of them, and they're doing what's best for them. Here's the candy bar kind of thing, and ultimately you on the other side of that are painted as the crazy parent, as the one who doesn't want to have fun, who doesn't love them because you're not giving them the candy bar that they need. So when everything all is said and done, they've got this unhealthy kind of relationship with your children that is really far more childlike than it is parent-like. That they don't parent, they friend. They just befriend. My job as with my children is to be a parent first and a friend second, always. Even now, my job is to be a parent first. Is there a friendship? Should there be? Absolutely, in those kinds of relationships, but parent first. And narcissists don't work that way. It's friend first, enabling, and entitlement and those kinds of things. And on the other end of that, you get spoiled kids. You get kids who are entitled, lack of respect for parents. It's very hard. So these covert narcissists, instead of running to somebody else, a lot of times narcissists are accused of cheating. Well, sometimes that cheating is actually your own family, and they've emotionally attached to children in a way that they should really be more attached to their husband, and that primary relationship should always be front and center. Best thing you can do to give your kid a healthy environment is to have a good marriage, and that marriage has to be the center, and the kids kind of spin around that center of health. And if it's opposite, and like in your situation and mine, where the unhealthy parent kind of does their own thing without you, when they leave, that becomes their new supply, and it's kind of frightening to see. It feels
one thing you just said about how they friend, I would take it further, as a lot of those people, the narcissists will parentify the kids. The kids end up being emotionally responsible for the parents' emotional health, because the narcissistic parent relies on the kids to build them up too. So that builds like really unhealthy kids too, who become codependent and put like everyone else's needs ahead, because their primary relationship, their parent, is relying on them for emotional support, and that's not that should never be a child's role. That's why it's so important for anyone getting out of these relationships to take care of themselves, get therapy with grown-ups, and never, as much as possible, don't bring the kids into like making you feel better.
Yeah. How long were you in therapy? Just let's talk about that for a minute. You went and got help. I went and got help. How long were you in therapy?
A few years. I'm thinking, like, because we had couples counseling for a while, 3 different therapists with that, and then I got a therapist for myself, which was through the divorce process, and probably like a couple of years after that.
Yeah, about the same.
Like here, actually, and then like here and there, different therapists that I just spoke to.
Yep. I was fortunate enough to have 2 really good therapists. One, I actually went on a sales call to a counseling practice and found a therapist there who engaged me about, she specialized in helping men out of narcissistic relationships. It was really pretty amazing. And she thought that that men were the hardest hit in the whole thing too. It's interesting hearing a woman's perspective in it. And without her and the other therapist that I still have and visited yesterday, I still go to touch base and make sure that I'm on a healing path. If you can go find somebody, and it takes time to go. Part of investing in yourself is going and finding somebody like that who can help you. It can really be beneficial in your own personal healing and self-respect and self-care and those kinds of things as you kind of get out of the relationship.
Yeah, there it is. Investing in yourself will make you a better parent.
Yep.
and your kids need a good parent. They need at least one good parent. All right, so I'm looking at the time over my shoulder, just like, oh my gosh. All right, Jon, will you please come back? Because I'm seeing all these comments like, you have to have him come back sometime.
Yeah. Oh no, I would love to do it anytime. So so let's set up a time. And thank you so much.
Okay.
And Padita, I
tell people how to find you before you leave.
Me at male victims of femalenarcissist.com. There is a book coming too, probably about end of the summer. I've been working on that for a year with an editor, so it'll tell my story and do some teaching as well, and give a male's perspective on kind of getting out of a relationship and how I figured it all out. So so that'll be coming. But male victims of femalenarcissist.com, you can connect with me there, or male victims of female narcissists on Instagram as well, and we'd be happy to connect with you. And if there's anybody out there struggling, I know Lisa as well. If you're really in it and you just need somebody to chat with, I've certainly made myself available to people. It's amazing when it kind of makes sense, and you go, oh my God, I've been dealing with this. You know, I'm convinced my posts are finding the right people out there who are in this, and they need help. And if you know, whatever knowledge or insight we have is yours, we'd be honored to help you through the journey. There are things we can help you with, things we can't, but we'd be a great resource for you. And thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Jon. This was awesome. And everyone who's saying save the live, I'm posting the recording in the next few minutes, and then it'll get on a podcast and our YouTube channel later, but it'll stay on Instagram to watch whenever.
Thank you again for having me. Such a great time to connect.
All right, you're welcome. Talk soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.